All right, good morning, everybody. So we are going to finish the discourse today, which means we start something fresh next week. It's a good time because this week we will finish reading the Torah. And then we'll start again. It's a good time to finish and start and commit, all that good stuff. So before we do continue with the discourse, I want to talk a little bit about the holiday. So first of all, everybody who's got a bagel, we're going to make a blessing on the bagel and a blessing on the sukkah. All right? So let's say the blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu leishev basukkah. Say that again. You can make the blessing not on the sukkah. The sukkah you have to make on either, only on bread or cake or kiddush. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the holiday. So we're sitting in a sukkah. It's very apropos that this holiday is a holiday of joy. The Torah repeats itself multiple times to tell us that this is a holiday of joy. Sequentially, it comes obviously after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which are days of profound soul connection. And there's an analogy that's given of a couple that are dating. So during the month of Elul, the month of preparation, the couple dates. On Rosh Hashanah is the proposal, right, where we ask God to commit again to another year. That act is symbolized in the blowing of the shofar. And then Yom Kippur is the marriage. It's a day of essence, of us connecting with Hashem on an essential level. And then in the Jewish tradition, the wedding is, after the wedding, we have 7 days known as Sheva Brachos, seven days of celebration, or Shivas Yimei HaMishta, the 7 days of parting, which after the wedding, we have 6 additional meals, 6 additional celebrations to celebrate the holiday. And again, we have the holiday of Sukkot, which kind of reflects that idea. When one experiences joy, our sages say that Simcha Poretz Geder, joy breaks down all boundaries. So a person may have conflict, one may have tension within themselves, within their relationships. When we move to a place of essence, when we move to a place of joy, those boundaries fall away. And the sukkah is one of the mitzvot, one of the commandments of the holiday, which represents unity. There's a Hasidic saying that the sukkah embraces us even with our muddy boots. Meaning the totality of who we are, we're embraced by the sukkah. Another interesting thing is that the minimum requirement for a sukkah is two walls and then what's known as a tefach, a handbreadth. So in Jewish law, a handbreadth can be extended in the halachic imagination to replace an entire wall. So one needs 3 walls. But if you have 2 and then a handbreadth, an additional wall sticking out up to a handbreadth, that qualifies as a kosher sukkah. And you think about a hug, right? A hug is made up of 1, 2, and a handbreadth. So the sukkah is the divine embrace, and it embraces all of us as we are, without distinction. So that follows up on the theme of essence, and then where the essence expresses itself in embracing the totality of who we are and the totality of us as a people. The other mitzvah of Sukkah is known as the 4 kinds, the Daled Minim. So we'll start with the esrog. So the esrog is a citron, which I think in English means like a lemon, a little bitter, a little sour. How do we know that the esrog is the esrog? So the Torah says, Pri Eitz Hadar, a fruit from the tree, which is a choice fruit. But in Hebrew, the word Hadar can also be read Hadar, which means it dwells. It dwells on the tree for 4 seasons. It lives the whole year. Specifically, the esrog, there's a tradition around the esrogs that we have today. So the tradition is that the seeds of the esrog were carefully planted from one generation to another, and they're planted in a very specific way, so they don't nurture from any other tree. So it's a pure esrog. There are generally two types of esrogim. There's the esrog from Israel, and then there's an esrog from a city in Italy known as Calabria. The Chabad custom is we use esrogs from Calabria. You can actually tell the difference. They look different. The esrogs from Israel are a little more bumpy. These are a little bit simpler. And there's a tradition that Moses was carried on a cloud to Calabria, to Italy, where he retrieved the esrog. But in the esrog, we have the notion of unity, because any other fruit nurtures from 1 season or 2 seasons or 3 seasons. The esrog brings together all 4 seasons in one fruit. So that's the esrog, representing the idea of unity. Then we have the lulav. The lulav is a palm branch. And I read yesterday that many lulavim come from the Canary Islands. I don't know why. Maybe they grow a lot of palm trees there. But a lot of people will not use the lulav that comes from the Canary Islands because they don't grow on date palms. The Torah specifically says it should be a date palm. So the unity in the lulav, first of all, you can see how you have all these individual leaves that hug the lulav. But if you take any one of these leaves, it's doubled over. It's not going to perform for me now. You can see how the leaf is doubled over. And a kosher lulav, the center stem has to be complete. So what will happen as a lulav dries is the top one will begin to split. They begin to split from the top. They work their way down. And then for whatever reason, some lulavim just happen to not be whole. But here again, we have the idea of individuality that's brought together. Then we have the myrtle. The myrtle is a very fascinating thing. If you look closely, when you get your opportunity to shake the lulav, you have these 3 leaves, and they all come from one root. So we have, again, the idea of unity, where there's I think the word is a triumvirate, right? You have 3 that come together, and in order for the myrtle to be kosher, it has to have this format of 3 leaves coming from one root. And then finally, we have the aravos. Aravos are willow, and the Torah tells us that the willow needs to grow. So I'll talk about why you could barely see the willows in a second. The willows have to grow. They're called arvei nachal, willows of the river. There are a lot of willows. If you're into botany, you would know that. I don't. I'm not into botany. But there's a lot of different types of willows. And the willows that grow at the river grow in bunches. In fact, most willows grow together in bunches. They grow like a family together. Again, the idea of unity. So on the holiday, we take all four kinds and bring them together, and we fulfill the mitzvah by shaking it. The Talmud tells us that we shake it in all directions to dispel any negative energy that comes from any direction. There are actually special prayers that we recite in the morning service throughout the holiday, where we ask God for salvation, and we ask God to save us from all kinds of different things, from negative things associated with the produce, grasshoppers, pestilence, and so on and so forth. We ask God that the crop should grow well. And we also ask God for other things in our lives, that they should all be peaceful and things should flow easily. The four kinds also represent four types of people. So, does anybody know what an instant shower is? If you've ever been in college or in yeshiva, you know what an instant shower is. An instant shower is where you don't take a shower, you just spray yourself with deodorant. What's the idea behind that? The idea is that you can be dirty, but you can smell good, right? And in life, a person can be dirty, but they can smell good. How do you smell good? Anybody? How do you smell good if you're dirty on the inside? You're well dressed. That's good. What did you say?
Right. French.
How do you French? I'm sorry. Okay, let's talk about it in the metaphor. How do you smell good to others when you're rotten on the inside? Okay, not everybody has charisma. I'll put it in different words. I'm sorry. You fake it, okay. Go ahead. You want to say something?
I was just saying, yes.
You put a mask on.
You put a mask on. Okay, it doesn't have to be a negative. So let's elaborate for a minute. I'll give you a different context. You wake up in the morning and you're in a bad mood, right? So does everybody have to smell your bad mood? You can put on a smile. Is that faking it? I don't know if that's you're faking that you're not in a bad mood, but that's not a bad thing, right? So just because a person may be rotten on the inside, it doesn't mean that you can't treat others with kindness, that you can't show up in an ideal way, right? I think we tell this to our children all the time. Like, just because you're in a bad mood, you don't got to take it out on your sister, right? Just because you're not feeling up to it, it doesn't mean that you have to be negative towards others. I had an uncle. His name was Schwartzy. Some of you may have read his book. His book it's called "I Love When That Happens." He was a very colorful character. The cover of his book is tie-dye, and he never wore a white shirt except to a funeral. He was a rabbi. He was a very colorful character. Anyway, he used to say, "Fake it till you make it." In other words, you don't have to be a righteous individual to act righteously. You could be rotten on the inside and still show up wonderfully on the outside. And in fact, I think on some level, all of us live at times in that space. In other words, sometimes we're not feeling up to our roles in life as a parent, as a spouse, as wherever we have influence in our world. And when we surrender to the negative, then we act negatively. But if we recognize that even if we're feeling negative on the inside, and even if we're not at the level that we want to profess, if we still act that way, that's a good thing, right? So our goal is to strive to not have BS, to not fake it. The goal is to try to, as the Mishnah says, that the outside should be like the inside. But that's a lifelong journey, and some of us never make it there. And that's our journey in life, is to try to align the inside with the outside, or the outside with the inside. And we may or may never get there, but that's our journey in life, is to show up in action. We've discussed many times that the soul has three garments: thought, speech, and action. It doesn't say the soul has good emotional characteristics as a garment. We may have negative characteristics, but the way we show up on the outside, we're in control of. Not only on the outside, but even inside of ourselves, right? How we think. There's a whole world of positive thinking. I think it's from Eckhart Tolle, the idea that we can think positive, we can think ourselves into a positive outcome, even if we're not really there. We live in a world today that's, filled with anxiety and stress and so on. And if we surrender to that, that's how we're going to look on the outside too. But if we say that might be something that's going on the inside, but on the outside I can show up differently, we can do that. Okay. So the first thing is smell. Smell represents action predominantly. How do we show up in the world? Then we have taste. What does taste represent in this context? Don't be shy. Okay, go further. What does taste represent? If smell represents how we show up on the outside, what does taste represent?
Essence.
How we are on the inside, right? How we are on the inside. So on the inside, when we have good taste, that means the inside stuff is good. Our characteristics are good. Our qualities are good. It doesn't mean that just because we're good on the inside, that we show up on the outside that way. Right? So sometimes we could be good on the inside, but we're not really willing to go the extra mile to show up on the outside that way as well. So taste represents content. Smell represents action. In our relationship with God, taste represents Torah, right? We study Torah, we bring it inside. And the mitzvah, the commandments, is how we show up on the outside. We get that? So now we can talk about the four kinds. An esrog has taste and it has smell. So it represents a person who has Torah study, Torah knowledge. They're good on the inside and they smell good on the outside. Their actions show up consistent with how they are on the inside. The lulav comes from a date palm. Dates have taste. They don't really have smell. So that represents a person who has Torah knowledge. They may be a scholar, but they don't necessarily show up in action. The myrtles have smell, but no taste. So that represents the person who shows up in action, but doesn't necessarily have the content. And then the willow has neither taste nor smell, and that represents the person that's incomplete in both content and in action. The law allows for, we're required to have 2 willows, but only 2 willows. We're not allowed to have more than 2 willows, but we can have as many myrtles as we like. I happen to have 36 willows. And the Chabad custom is, 36 myrtles, thank you. And the Chabad custom, so let me say that again, so I get it right. Only allowed to have 2 willows, but you can have many myrtles. And the Chabad custom is that we actually hide the myrtles. No, we hide the willows inside the myrtles. Thank you. See how much my botany is in line here. So we hide the willows inside the myrtles to represent both an embrace of the willow, the embrace of the willow, and the idea of influencing the willow. And the idea is that we take all of these 4 kinds and we bring them together, and that's how we make the blessing. And if you're missing any one of them, you can't make the blessing. Another interesting thing is that when we take these 4 kinds, we take them in the sukkah, and after we make the blessing, we bring it to our heart. Every time we shake it, we bring it to our heart. So the idea is that Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, as we mentioned earlier, are days of essence, of essential connection. We enter into the sukkah. The concept, we've been studying a lot about the idea of Sovev Kol Almin, how God encompasses the world. And the upside of an encompassing energy is that it's very powerful. That's why it's encompassing. It's because it cannot be internalized. So it only surrounds us. That's true with everything in life. Anything that surrounds us, the reason why it surrounds us is not inside of us is because we can't take it in. But we do this in the sukkah, which surrounds us. So it represents an encompassing energy. And then we take the lulav and the esrog, we take the 4 kinds, and we bring it to our heart to take this encompassing energy and to bring it inside of ourselves, to bring it into us. Yes. I'll try. You can also come a little closer. We got a lot of competition today. One more idea on the holiday, and then we'll get to the discourse. So tomorrow evening begins the festival of Shmini Atzeres, Shmini Atzeret. In the diaspora, we call the 8th day Shmini Atzeret, and the 9th day we call it Simchas Torah. Now, really, from the Torah standpoint, the holiday, both days of holiday is Shmini Atzeres. In Israel, they combine them together in one. In Israel, Shmini Atzeres is when they celebrate Simchas Torah. Additionally, welcome. Additionally, the prayers that we say on Simchas Torah, we actually don't say like we say on Passover, but B'yom Chag HaMatzos Hazeh, on this day of matzah, or on Shavuos we say Zman Matan Torah, the time of the giving of our Torah, or B'yom Chag HaShavuos Hazeh. On the 8th and the 9th day, both days we say B'yom Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh, on the 8th day of this holiday. What is this holiday all about? So the Medrash tells us, because it happens to be in the diaspora, we will sit in the sukkah on the 8th day, but we won't sit in the sukkah on Simchas Torah. And that has to do, it's a conversation for another time. That's how, because in the diaspora, we celebrate 2 days of all the holidays except for Yom Kippur, thank God, because of how they established the new months and so on and so forth. So the 8th day might be the 7th day, so therefore we also sit in the sukkah, but we don't make the blessing on the sukkah. Again, not important. If you didn't get that, we'll save that for another time. But the holiday really isn't about the sukkah. And in Israel, they don't sit in the sukkah on the 8th day. So what's the holiday all about? There's really no specific traditions associated with the holiday. The whole idea of celebrating with the Torah, first of all, we don't do that on the 8th day. We only do that on the 9th day. And that was a custom that was instituted later. It wasn't the practice to celebrate Simchas Torah all the years. So what is the holiday all about? It's a very odd kind of holiday. Passover, we celebrate the Exodus. Shavuos, we celebrate the giving of the Torah. Rosh Hashanah, we celebrate the New Year. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. Sukkot, we celebrate God's protection for us in the desert. But what's this holiday? So the Medrash says an interesting thing. For the first 7 days of the holiday, we bring offerings for the nations of the world. We bring a total of 70, according to Jewish tradition. And if you look, in 2 weeks, we'll read the Torah portion of Noach. After the dispersion, after the Tower of Babel and the dispersion, the Torah lists all the generations. And if you look in the Art Scroll Chumash, in the stone edition of the Art Scroll Chumash, they actually list the names of the 70 nations. So there are 70 nations. Our tradition tells us that we're like the sheep surrounded by 70 wolves. That's our destiny. But we have 70 nations that surround us. And despite the fact that there's 70 wolves trying to eat the sheep, which hasn't changed much in 3,000 years, we still bring offerings every day of the holiday on behalf of the nations of the world. And the Medrash says if the nations of the world understood the power of those sacrifices, they would protect Jerusalem to ensure that the sacrifices would continue. After we finish bringing those 70 sacrifices, the Medrash says that God says, before you leave, he turns to his only child and he says, before you leave, before you go back to real life, right? It's been a good season. We had the festival of Sukkot where we sat together. We had Yom Kippur. We had Rosh Hashanah. We even had a month of preparation. And now it's all coming to an end. And we're going to go back to real life. I don't know what's real life, but we're going back to life. So God says, Kosha alai pridaschem. Your departure is difficult for me. So let's spend one more day together, just you and I. So it's a day of connection. It's a day of oneness with God. Where is God represented on this earth? It's in the Torah. And so we dance with the Torah. We don't read the Torah. We will read the Torah after the dancing, but we don't read the Torah on Simchas Torah. We dance with the Torah. And how do we dance? We dance with our feet. So we dance from the very base of who we are on the most basic level. God takes us into this dance together as one. So that's the basic idea. But there's two other relevant points. One is a technical question. The Medrash says that God says, your departure is difficult for me. So what does it help if you spend another day together? Another day, it's still going to be difficult the day after, right? There's an elderly woman. She's from the South, but she grew up with Yiddish in the home. And she has on her door, she has a mezuzah. And the case of the mezuzah has a quote from the Torah, where it's on one side it says, "Blessed are you in your coming," on the other side it says, "Blessed are you in your leaving." Baruch ata b'vayecha, baruch ata b'tzeisecha. So I went to her house once and I noticed the mezuzah, and I said, "Oh, it's a beautiful mezuzah." She said, "Yes, my mother always used to say, 'Thank you for coming and thank you for leaving.'" So sometimes when the children and the grandchildren hang out for too long, you want to say thank you for coming and thank you for leaving. But God doesn't get tired of us. So what's the extra day going to help? That's one question. Another question is, it doesn't say our separating is difficult for me. It says your separating is difficult for me. Why is that? So I heard a beautiful teaching. It goes like this. God is saying your separation, you, my children, when you are separated from each other, it's difficult for me. Come on in. Your being separate from each other is difficult for me. In other words, when we don't get along, God says, it's difficult for me. God wants us to get along with each other. So the extra day of holiday, after we've been involved in all of this wonderful spiritual service, this extra day of holiday is for us to recognize the bond that we have with each other, the connection that we have with each other, so that when we return to the mundane life, we don't lose the connection. Right? Where there's no other traditions except to be connected. And one final teaching connected to this is the word atzeres, Shmini atzeres, or atzeret, means to capture or to absorb. So if you think about the energy of the whole season, 51, 52 days, right? All of this powerful energy. It's such a gift. I was listening to a podcast last night. You know, everybody's getting a little bit ahead of themselves, but hopefully it's all going to work out. You know, the war coming to an end and the hostages being returned. And so everybody's already looking back, right? What's this all about?
Monday, Sunday.
Tonight, in the diaspora, late tonight, yeah. So this fellow was saying the Jewish culture, the Israeli culture, it makes no sense to the rest of the world. It's such a strange thing. Here we have a country that's constantly at war, constantly struggle, the people that are traumatized from thousands of years of history. And yet, there is an annual study that's done on the happiest nations in the world, and Israel always ranks near the top, the fifth, the fourth. It makes no sense. So he said, the reason is because the average Israeli family has, I think it's 3.25 children. I don't want to be that 0.25 child, but they have 3.25 children. And the more, what he said is the more right, the more observant, the more children you have. It's the modern Orthodox have an average 6 children. The Haredim have 8 children. And the more secular Jews, he actually said it like this. He says the people with black kippahs have 8 children. The people with the knit kippahs have 6 children. And the people with the kippah in the pocket have 3.25 children. When you have children, you have even 3 children, you're going to have 3 families. And if they have 3.25 children, you've got somewhere about 9.75 children, right? And we have an abundance of holidays and Shabbat each week. So families get together, right? And that energy It's not even here like in the diaspora, right? You can have children that live a 4-hour plane ride, 5-hour plane ride away. There, the farthest it could be is a 2-3 hour drive. So it's very easy for families to get together on the holidays. So when you spend this much time together as a family, you become energized, you become connected. And not just because you're sitting together on a beach, but you're sitting together celebrating. You're celebrating Jewish values. You're celebrating our tradition. So if we think about the energy of the last 50 days, and Shmini Atzeres will be, I think it's 52 days, a lot of energy going on, especially as we've been studying in the various different teachings, the energy of the month of Elul, the energy of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, the encompassing energy. That's a lot of energy. Where do we put all that energy? So the word Atzeres means to capture, to absorb. And it's a day that has no other traditions other than to absorb and download this energy, to really internalize it. There's a fellow I spoke to on Friday who's going through a very difficult time legally. And I'm encouraging him, to stay positive and so on. And I said, you got to dip into your soul. You got to dip into your soul. Like, let your soul energize you. So he said, how do I do that? How do I energize? How do I feel the soul? Because I think we also have this notion, like, if I feel my soul, like it's going to be all encompassing and it's going to be like this transformative experience that I'm going to feel all the time. Experiencing the soul is a momentary experience. We only have Yom Kippur one day a year because we can't be in that space. That's not the reality of human life, to be that deeply connected in a constant way. If you want to feel that energy, you got to pause. My suggestion to him was to go into the sukkah, where we're surrounded by this embrace of the divine, and to close his eyes and empty his mind and empty his heart of any distractions, just for 5 minutes, and just try for a second to let your soul talk to you, to let your soul express itself. And that's all it takes, is if we can experience that for a moment, for a second, it can energize us for an entire year. That's the power of the soul. So Shmini Atzeres is a holiday where we absorb all of the energy of the season, we bring it in, and in a sense, there's no greater place to do that than when you're dancing. You're dancing with the Torah. You release distractions. I think I mentioned this last time. If you're in a bad mood and you start dancing, you're going to get into a good mood. Why? Because the soul opens up. It releases an energy that overwhelms and washes over all of the negativity. So Simchas Torah is a time to Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. These are days that we download and absorb all the energy of the season. Any questions? Okay. Yes. When do we dance? So we dance. There'll be no mariachis at Simchas Torah, but we have plenty of singing. So the tradition is, in the diaspora, we will dance tomorrow night in solidarity with Israel. It's not as elaborate, but in Chabad we don't do anything halfway. So no music. No, you got to make your own music. And then Tuesday night, no pumped music. It's all vocal. Tuesday night is the main festivities of Simchas Torah. You're welcome to join us here. We start with a short service, and then we service the brisket, and then we dance. So then we'll dance, and then again Wednesday morning we will continue. We have morning services, and then during the services we dance again, and then we will then we read the Torah, conclude the reading of the Torah, and then we roll the Torah to the beginning, and we start anew. You can dance with a cane too. The highlight is always dancing on the belt line. Well, at one point we'll take the Torahs out onto the belt line, and we'll dance on the belt line. And tomorrow evening at 6:30, and then Tuesday at 7:30, and then Wednesday at 10 a.m. Okay. Any other questions? besides the mariachi band? Okay, let's try to finish the discourse today so we can start fresh next week. So again, the premise of this discourse is the commandment in the Torah: you shall know today and place it to your heart that Hashem hu ha-Elokim, that Hashem is Elokim. And what we've been discussing is the idea that knowledge, knowing, 38, 39, somewhere around there. What we've been discussing is that we have a commandment to know God and we have a commandment to believe in God. And we have to distinguish what is defined as knowledge and what is defined as faith. What we've been discussing is that knowing is not intellectual. Knowing is inherent. So I know that I'm alive, even if I can't explain why I'm alive. I know that the sun is shining, even if I know nothing about the sun. I know that the tree is beautiful. There was an argument at one point in our house of one of the meals about the taste of food. There's a Hebrew saying, "Al tam vareach ein lehitvakeach," which means on taste and smell you can't debate. Some people like a certain smell. Some people find the smell to be abhorrent. Some people like certain foods. Other people find those foods to be abhorrent. You can't rationalize that. You can't intellectualize that. I know that I like this type of food, and you know that you don't like that type of food. I know that smell I don't like, and I know that, and you know that smell you do like. You can't rationalize that. You can't intellectualize it. It just is what it is. Now, if you were a scientist and you understood, you did the study on taste buds, you can maybe explain what it is, but it's not going to change anything. Knowing what the science is behind, knowing the science behind the taste buds is not going to change my reality that I like this food and I don't like that food. I like this smell, I don't like that smell. So knowledge is experiential. The Alter Rebbe calls it hargasha, feeling. When I know God, I don't have to understand it. When I know God, when you'll take those moments to close your eyes and meditate and feel your soul, you'll know God. You're not going to necessarily be able to explain it, but you'll know God. And that level of knowing of God is the level of knowing God that He makes available to us. Remember, we mentioned the idea that something that encompasses us is too great to be internalized. So if we're internalizing something, if we're experiencing something, if we know something, it's because it's accessible. Even if we can't explain it, the fact that I know it means that it's accessible. And God lets Himself be accessible through a process of creation, through something known as tzimtzum, which is a divine contraction. God allows for us to have an independent consciousness and to be in a relationship with God. By the way, parenthetically, talking about the sukkah, when you hug, so why is a hug so important? Why is a hug so impactful? Right? Between lovers, between a parent and a child. Why is a hug so important? What do you think? What are you doing already? You're taking your arms, you're wrapping them around someone. Why is that so impactful? It makes a person feel safe. It makes a person feel connected. When I embrace someone, what am I doing? I'm creating space for someone else. Inside of myself, I'm opening myself up to create space for another. And that's what God does. By embracing us in the sukkah, God is creating space for us. When God created the world, God created space for us. Before creation, I guess we're working on getting ourselves into the spirit here. So before creation, there was only the divine consciousness. And when there's only a divine consciousness, there's no relationship there. God can't have a relationship with Himself. So in order for God to have a relationship, God created a world where there are conscious beings that exist in this world, and we think of ourselves as independent beings from the divine. And then we can choose to be in this relationship with God. But the only way we can possibly be in a state of self-consciousness and then choose to enter into a relationship with God is if we don't experience God in a revealed way. Because otherwise we wouldn't be able to internalize it. We would be awash with the divine presence. So when we talk about knowing God, we're talking about knowing the dimension of God that's accessible to us, that's within our consciousness, that's within the created world. And when we can know something, then we don't believe in it. We know it. Belief comes in when we can't know something. For me to say I believe the sun is shining is not really utilizing my human qualities. And you would say to me, you don't have to believe it, just go and look at it. Look at it. So faith, belief comes in when we can't know. What can't we know? We can't know by definition that which is transcendent, that which doesn't fit into our experience. If it can fit into our experience, we call it knowing. If it can't fit into our experience, we call that faith. So within the divine manifestation, the dimension of God that's within the created process, by definition, God made accessible. The dimension of God that's transcendent is inaccessible. And so, when we talk about faith, we're talking about having faith in the dimension of God that's transcendent. Did that make sense? Any questions, comments, disagreements? Okay, so now. So how do we access that dimension of God? So we discussed earlier in the discourse that we access that dimension of God through the study of Torah, through the observance of God's commandments, and then through prayer. The mitzvah, the Torah study, is God's wisdom placed into the Torah that we have the capacity to study. And by studying the Torah, we get access to the channel that goes up to the transcendent dimension of God. The commandments, there are 613 commandments. They are channels between us and God. And when we do a mitzvah, we access the divine energy that's in that mitzvah to connect us in our finite space into this transcendent space. And prayer is the work we can do to move ourselves from an immediate consciousness into something transcendent. Now, that doesn't mean that we're ever going to understand that transcendent dimension, but it means that we have the ability to access it. Because when we pray and we meditate, we become more intimately connected with what we do know. And the higher we go in our knowledge, the higher we go in our awareness, in a sense, the closer we get to that place of transcendence. We gave the analogy of a relationship between a couple. There is an essential connection there that we'll never fully be able to relate to because we're different beings, but through action, we create connection. The more we learn about the other person, the more knowledge we have of them. And then there's an act of surrender. In every healthy relationship, there's an act of surrender that allows us to connect with this higher dimension, even if we don't know it and we don't feel it, and sometimes we don't even like it. Sometimes in a relationship, we're not even interested in trying to connect on that level. We don't have the interest to know that level of the other. But through the actions, especially when it doesn't make sense to us, right? A relationship doesn't live, the depths of a relationship is not in the place where we understand the other, right? If it made sense to me why my wife likes diamonds, I buy them all the time. But it doesn't make sense to me. It's a rock. It's a shiny rock, but there's other shiny rocks, whatever. But I'll never understand it. But in an act of surrender, I'll buy her diamonds because I know that's what she wants. I don't know why God. So there's certain commandments, as we discussed last time, certain commandments that make sense to us. Right? Well, I explained the Lulav and Esther. I explained the 4 kinds. It makes sense. It may be strange why God would want us to express unity in this way, but he figured it out and he told us what to do. So when we take the 4 kinds, we understand there's some symbolism in the unity that's expressed there. We could understand that placing a mezuzah on the door brings divine protection. But there are other commandments that make no sense. And in fact, I'm not saying they make no sense. The Torah says they make no sense. Well, I shouldn't call them that they don't make sense. The Torah tells us that they're beyond our comprehension. They're divine decrees. But when I do those commandments because God wants me to, what dimension of God am I connecting with? Not the dimension of God that's within our consciousness. I'm connecting with the dimension of God that's above our consciousness, by definition. Because if it's within our consciousness, I understand it. I enjoy it. If I'm doing a mitzvah that's beyond our consciousness, because I don't understand it, I'll never understand it. So my act of doing it is in order to connect with God in this transcendent way.
You pray meditate with the mitzvah, the action. You enter that transcendence, which is the frequency.
You don't enter the transcendence, you download the transcendence. So now, when are we going to experience the dimension of divine transcendence that we're calling faith? So we discussed at length that will take place in the Messianic era. The Messianic era, so just to qualify that, so we have Mora, can you guys either move somewhere else or be a little quieter? Thank you. What is the what is the opposite of the Messianic era? Exile. What is exile? Let's talk about exile within the human experience. I've discussed a lot the notion of IFS, internal family systems. Well, I'm not going to get into today, but it's a mode of therapy that's very popular today, internal family systems. And in internal family systems, they talk about parts of us that are exiled. What does it mean a part of us is exiled? It means there's a part of us that's not expressing itself, or it's expressing itself in a very unhealthy way because of the story that it has around itself or the experience it has around itself. So the concept of exile is where something is not expressing itself. Nelson Mandela was exiled. He wasn't in a prison. He was exiled to a particular locale. He was free within that locale. But because he couldn't do his outreach, so he was exiled. The previous Rebbe, 1927, was sentenced to death for his efforts in spreading Judaism in the former Soviet Union. And they commuted the sentence to 10 years exile. And he was sent to a city called Kosteroma. Before he left on the train, he sent, well, I'll go take a step back. They informed him that he was going to be sent to this exile and that the death sentence was commuted. So they told him, you can go home, meet with your family, say goodbye, come to the train. The train is going to leave in this and this time. So he said to them, when is the train going to arrive in Kosteroma? So they said it's going to arrive Saturday afternoon, on Shabbos afternoon. So he says, I'm not going. Do you understand that any one of those guards could put a bullet in his head in a second? His life was in danger. He had it's an interesting thing. If a woman gives birth, I don't mean to offend any doctors, but if a woman gives birth and the hospital will let her leave on Shabbos, like her time in the hospital has ended, she's allowed to drive on Shabbos home. Why? Because hospitals are dangerous places. They're places for healing, but staying beyond the time that you need to heal, there's all kinds of potential for contracting all kinds of negative things. So a woman's allowed to leave on Shabbos because her life's in danger, right? The previous Rebbe's life was in danger. But he said to them, I'm not traveling. So they said, if that's the case, you'll have to stay in the prison until Sunday. So he said, okay, so I'll stay in the prison until Sunday. And this is a place where they beat him. They tortured him. He suffered the rest of his life because of it. So what is that all about? Because he didn't want to be exiled inside of himself. And to be exiled is to hide and to conceal and to stifle the Jewish identity. If I can't express my Jewish identity, then I'm in exile. If you're going to take that away from me, then I'm in exile. I could be in a prison. I could be in the worst prison in the world. But if who I am is free, If who I am is liberated, then I'm liberated. So he was sent to the city of exile called Kastarma. As soon as he came home, he sent a chassid on an express train to go to the city to open up the mikvah. The communists had filled the mikvahs with concrete, and he sent this chassid to go to Kastarma to open the mikvah, of complete violation of the very things he was arrested for. Because he wasn't going to go into a city where he was free to move around within the city and not have Judaism there. So exile is a state where who you are cannot be expressed. God being in exile, which is what creates the exile, is where God is not visible. We don't see God. God is hidden. In that concealment, God is hidden. And our job in exile is to try to expose that God is here, to look at nature, to look at life, to look at life's circumstances, and to recognize that in all of this, this is all God at work. But because we can't visually see that, whether visually, physically, or visually, spiritually, we can't see God's presence. So therefore, God is in exile. That's the nature of exile. So what's the opposite of that? What's the messianic era? What's redemption? Redemption is where God is visible, where there's no concealment, where the masks come off. So what is the two states of knowledge and faith? Knowledge is where we are knowing God within the concealment. Faith is God as he is not concealed, but we are limited today in our current state of exile, to be able to experience that transcendent dimension of God. And this is why the verse says, V'yodaita hayoim, you should know today. Today meaning in the non-messianic era, in the exile era. This is when we have the ability to know. In the messianic era, we won't need to know. We won't need to know God in this dimension. We'll know God as he is in his transcendent state, in a manner of knowing. In other words, what we have faith for today, which is the transcendent dimension, we will know then in a manner of knowledge. We'll have a relationship with the transcendent dimension of God in that state. Let me, if you don't mind, I want to try to finish the discourse. So I want to read this inside here. Let's look at the bottom of 38. He says, Masha enkin hayoim, today, in our current state, the verse says, V'yodaita hayom, you shall know today, v'hashevoisa elevavecha, and place it to your hearts. In Hebrew, like we say in the Shema, you shall love Hashem your God, b'chol levavcha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol meidecha, with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul, with all your might. In Hebrew, your heart would be spelled libcha. Levavecha means your hearts, plural. Knowing God, our soul knows God. It's not our soul that needs to know God. It's our animal soul. It's our body that needs to know God. So the instruction is, you shall know today and place it to your hearts, plural. Place it to your hearts that not only your godly soul will know God, but your animal soul will also know God. In other words, when we talk about knowing God in a conscious way, we're talking about experiencing God in our body. That comes through this effort of prayer, of Torah study, of mitzvah observance, that we're able to actually experience God not only in our soul, but also in our body. That's what he says. Place it to your heart, with both of your inclinations, both of your souls. Where does this show up in life? It shows up when we hold ourselves back from doing something that God doesn't want us to do. And it shows up when we do something for the sake of God. This is called subduing and transforming. When we hold back from doing something that God doesn't want, we are subduing. We're subduing the animal nature. And when we take the physical world around us and we use it in the service of God, that's called transforming. 39. Shahayoim, today, in exile, we have the capacity to draw down this transcendent dimension of the divine. How do we do this? Al yedei v'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher anochi misha anochi mitzavach hayom sha'atayr v'amitzvah mebchinas seva kalam. The verse continues. How do we do this? By placing to our heart that which I command you. It doesn't say that which God commands you. It says that which I command you. Who's I? I is God himself. When you use a name, you're already defining the person by a description. When God uses the word I, God's names we're not allowed to say unless in the context of prayer. But I, we can say, because I doesn't have any definition to it. It's just essence. So you shall place to your heart that which I command you today. That God himself commands us to fulfill these commandments. That's our act of surrender. And the I that's commanding us is the dimension of God that's transcendent. Top of 40. And through this, v'yodaita hayoim ki havayu elikim, havayu b'chinas gilu elikim b'chinas hester v'tzimtzum, ki k'moishe yesh b'chinas hester v'tzimtzum b'chinas ma'alakam b'chinas aliyas v'yiridis v'izmanim eschalfim kanal kach yesh b'chinas soivaklam b'chinas havaya ze gilu b'chinas elikim hane hester v'tzimtzum b'zgaber zelu mazeh. I just read everything on page 40, which I'm going to explain to you what that means. So generally we have two names of God. We have the name, we pronounce it Ado and Noi, but it's spelled Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. If you want to know how to pronounce it, it's the first word of the witnesses. You know those witnesses? They say it with a J at the beginning. We say it with a Yud, a Y at the beginning. But that's how you pronounce that. We don't actually pronounce God's name that way. They did pronounce it that way in the temple, but we no longer pronounce it that way. It's too holy for us to actually say those words. So, but that name of God, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, represents the idea of transcendence, because the letters are an acronym for the words Haya, Hove, and Yihiyah. Haya means he was, Hove means he is, Yihiyah means he will be. What does that mean? He was, he is, and will be. Regarding what can we say was, is, and will be? Only something transcendent, something that's not defined by the parameters of now and here or past or future. So the name Havaya, the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, that's the name of God that's transcendent. Then we have another name, and that's the name Elokim. Elokim means judge. That's where God is judging his divine energy, meaning he's managing the divine energy so that it shows up for us in a way that we can have a relationship with it. So what is the verse telling us? That when we do today, when we show up and we say, God doesn't want me to do this, so I'm not going to do it. Or God wants me to do this, so I'm going to do it. Even if I don't understand it, what we're doing is we're bringing into a state of concealment, so to speak, into a state of exile, into the place of Elokim, where God is concealed. We're bringing in the transcendent dimension of the divine. We're bringing into that contained space a consciousness of something that's greater. And when we do that, we actually create transformation in the world around us and within ourselves. Even if we can't actually arrive to a space where we actually know the transcendent dimension of God, but we actually access that, we download it, we connect with it in this transformative way. And this is how the discourse ends. And it is necessary for us to invest ourselves in this, right? To know God to the extent that we can know God, because the more we know God, the more we're connecting with the transcendent dimension of God. It's not a free ride. Maybe on Yom Kippur you could have a moment of experience of essence, but our work throughout the year, you got to do the work. You got to do the best you can to know God, and then when you hit that wall of not knowing anymore, then you move into the space of transcendence. Put in different words, the higher we go up, the more we go up in knowledge, the closer we are to the place of transcendence. Not necessarily that we transcend, but that we connect with the transcendent. And that's the Torah's mitzvah. This very seemingly abstract commandment is very practical. You should know today and place it to your heart that Hashem is Elokim. Because the reality of God in concealment, there's not two gods here. There's not the transcendent God and the immanent God. It's the same God. In our experience, we don't see the God that's in the immanent, but it's the same God. And if the more we know, the more we tweak our frequency of spiritual eyesight, the more we get closer to connecting with the transcendent dimension as well. And we do that, almost done. We do this through subduing and transforming. And then the result of this is that the world becomes filled with the knowledge of God. That's a verse that's stated regarding the Messianic era, right? And we do this now as well. In other words, when we think about it for a second, the more we invest ourselves in living a life that's connected, the more we invest ourselves in being connected spiritually, Jewishly, connected to God, connected in our actions, the easier it is for us to access God. That's our work. And the blockages that we have is the body and our inability to see God. But inherent within us is this connection to God. God makes himself accessible. So therefore, the more we invest ourselves in doing what God says, the more Hashem becomes Elokim, the more the transcendent dimension of God becomes Elokim. That and this will bring about in the Messianic era where it says that the earth will forgive the sins, meaning that we create transformation within the limitation of the human, that the human itself becomes a holy being. So this is not, we may have done a lot of abstract stuff in the 12 classes that we had on this discourse, but it boils down to very simple. Do more Jewish, do more God, do more connection. The more we do that, the more we are connected. And the more we're connected, the more we get to experience that. It's the gift of being Jewish, is the ability to actually have an access point. We just got to do the work. Okay, yes.
I was thinking that it's why you prefer to be on the side when you get 80, then you want to be 90. You don't want to die and go and be old. You prefer to be good and now you want to be
Yeah. So there's interesting, there's a passage that says that in the Messianic era, we're going to yearn for the days of exile. Why? Because in the Messianic era, once you're in the space of divine consciousness, you can't do work anymore. There's no more work. So we still are ready for the Mashiach to come, but at the same time, we can recognize that now is the time that we have the opportunity to do the work, to do the heavy lifting, and to create that transformation. Okay, I invite everybody to come. We'll do a blessing. If you did not make the blessing yet this holiday, you're going to say 2 blessings. If you already made the blessing, you'll say 1 blessing. You're going to start with the lulav. We'll put the esrog on the second blessing. You'll bring them together, bring it to your heart, and shake it in all directions. Okay? L'chaim. New discourse next week.